Right. Now it's 10 o'clock. Good morning, everybody. My name is Taylor Clem. I'm the County Extension Director and Horticulture Extension Agent with IFAS Extension, Nassau County. I want to say thank you to Adele for helping set up today's slightly different Landscape Matters program. I had to travel. Yes, thank you, Adele. I had to travel to Gainesville today, so I'm actually in the city of Gainesville doing this presentation. So we have everybody online and as well as at Extension Office. So hi, everybody at the Extension Office. So as part of today's Landscape Matters program, as always, we're going to be recording this program. We will upload it onto our YouTube channel, as well as we'll follow up with some additional resources and other content related to today's program, including a copy of today's PowerPoint presentation. So let's go ahead and we will jump into the presentation today. If anybody online, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. I'm monitoring those, as well as if anybody in the Extension Office, you can ask some questions, but because the distance from the computer, you might have to come up closer to it so I can hear the questions or have someone relay it over the speaker for me or the microphone for me. But anyways, so welcome. Today's program is called Hunker Down, Preparing a Resilient Landscape. So today's program is all focused around hurricane season, really thinking about how we're preparing and thinking about our landscapes with regards to the inevitable storms that we end up having come across the state. We are in the middle of our hurricane season now, but usually around the time of August, September, October, that's usually when we see some of the bigger storms. So it's best for us to really think about how are we preparing and managing our landscapes to best prepare for any storms that come our way. So I'm going to quiz you all. This is a mangrove. Why are mangroves important, especially to Florida when it comes to storm resilience? You can put that in the chat box, or does anybody in the audience have an idea? You can raise your hand, or you can just come up to the computer and tell me your thoughts. We don't have any mangroves. Well, sorry, we do. Yeah. So some of the things that we're seeing in the chat box is stop the winds and the waves. They help prevent erosion. Absolutely. Absolutely. So protects development by buffering waves. Absolutely. So mangroves, we traditionally did not have them in Nassau County, but now we actually have mangroves that are starting to pop up. And like Duval and some places on the very southern end of Nassau County, we might actually see some of them come up. But mangroves are great at mitigating a lot of the storm-related damage associated with hurricanes, because essentially they are absorbing a lot of that energy created by the wind, the waves, etc., and it helps protect a lot of our coastal areas. Have you ever seen during storm events, especially down in the Keys, you'll see people take their boats and they'll bring them into the mangroves and they'll anchor them. And those boats are usually going to be much safer and way more protected than those that are still sitting in the marina. And it's just because the mangroves have that ability to help protect our coastal ecosystems and help with managing storm impacts or reducing storm impacts. So they're unbelievably valuable to have within our environment. And we're starting to see them actually creep up the eastern coast now of Florida. But anyways, today's essential question as part of today's program is really just thinking, how do I prepare a hurricane-ready, resilient landscape? Because the idea is, you know, we have storms, we have storm-related impacts come into our community, but we're really trying to think of like, okay, how do we go through the recovery period? How do we make sure that our landscape is going to be as prepared as possible to help mitigate or manage any type of damage that may occur, or to how to make sure that our landscapes are able to recover quickly? So By the end of today's program, we should be able to help answer this question: how do I prepare a hurricane-ready, resilient landscape? So some of the questions, one of the big things that we usually want to make sure that we ask is, well, what is a resilient landscape? What does that mean? So very briefly, the American Society of Landscape Architects, they say a resilient landscape is a landscape that recovers quickly from extreme events now and in the future. Some of these events can include drought, extreme heat, storms, hurricanes, flooding, etc. Any type of damage, any type of extreme event, our landscapes and our environment have the ability to recover very quickly, or at least be able to withstand a lot of those extreme events. So what we usually like to do is think okay, how can we work with our landscapes rather than against them? Working with our landscapes, using our environment, using our ecosystems to help provide, create, design, plan, manage everything that we have control over as a way to, how do we reduce risk? How do we make sure that it's scalable and diverse for any type of resilient landscape that we have? We look for multiple co-benefits, or the benefits that we can get from those different resilient landscapes that we can create, whether it's a benefit that we have within our own yard or landscape, or it could be something on a community or county or regional scale as well. And then regeneration, that natural ability for it to regenerate and recover in itself. So some really cool projects I've got to work on before in the past is related to stormwater flooding as a result of increased urbanization. So we're able to design and plan linear green belts and park systems that is able to be inundated with extreme flooding, but at the same time, during those non-flood events, it doubles as a biodiverse park for wildlife and habitat, as well as it creates a public amenity with different types of trails, etc. So there's different ways that we can kind of really look at how we're planning and managing our landscapes to help work with us, use those in ecosystem services to create and plan landscapes that are going to be resilient or be able to recover. So when I'm thinking about planning and reducing at least wind-related damage as a result to like hurricanes, tropical storms, etc., I have a 3-tier approach that I recommend, and it really comes down to design, maintenance, preparation, and then recovery. So when we're considering these as part of our landscape, it helps us better prepare, better plan, and have a landscape that becomes more resilient. And we can do this when considering any type of landscape damage or any type of extreme event that might occur within our environment. So we're going to talk about each one of these, in the context of managing our own lawns, or managing our own landscapes, rather. So we'll look at it from the perspective of design. What are some design considerations that we need to think about that can help reduce any type of wind-related damage? We can look at maintenance and preparation. So if maybe a storm is on its way, how do we make sure that things we have done in maintaining our property as well as preparing our property right before a storm can help with that landscape resilience, and then recovery as post-storm management opportunities. So design, ultimately, when we think about storm-related events, we think about tree breakage. We're concerned about trees falling, limbs breaking, causing damage to property. And sometimes what that has done is that has encouraged, or people have looked at that as a way to encourage themselves to actually remove trees, which is actually a very bad idea, because putting trees in clusters and groups is a great way to help protect our environment by essentially helps lift the wind up and over our properties, which we'll talk about more in a second. So whenever we're looking at landscape design, we really want to think about what are the trees that provide us the best protection, that have the higher wind resistance. So when we think about the Florida-friendly landscaping program's first principle of right plant, right place, think about wind resistance in your tree selection. So there's two types of failures. One is we call a breakage. The other is a topple. A breakage is really relating to branch breakage, and a topple is a full failure of a tree that knocks over. So when we're looking at wind resistance, we do have enough data when we look at some common tree species across the state. We do have some that we classify as high resistance and others as low resistance. And some of those high resistance ones that we really see is like live oaks, cabbage palms, yaupon hollies, and sparkleberries. And our low resistance, as trees include something like a Chinese elm. That's a very common landscape tree that we see throughout Nassau County, and they are very prone to breakage. Other ones include pecans, Bradford pear, which are invasive and we shouldn't have them anyways, as well as a tulip poplar. So if we a good rule of thumb really when we're thinking about wind resistance of trees, this isn't 100% by all means, but if we look more towards some of our native tree species, they're going to have a slightly higher resistance than our non-native trees. I kind of just think in my mind from the perspective as those trees evolved in this landscape. So it's part of their environment. So they are kind of built for it a little bit better than maybe some other trees. Now, of course, I say that, but some trees as they age, they are more prone to breakage. So other low resistant trees include something like a laurel oak and a water oak. And a lot of that has to do with it. They get to a point in their age where they're prone to rot occurring on the interior portions of the tree. So they lose a lot of that interior support and structure to help maintain that wind resistance. So when we usually look at tree failures across the state, we do see a lot of water and laurel oak damage as a result of storms. So it's just important to think about. But that really comes down to, okay, then how do we make sure that we're managing our landscapes appropriately to help reduce any type of risk, which we'll talk about more. So really, what is those high wind resistant trees? And I will send out to everybody a document that we have with IFAS that talks about different tree species and their different levels of wind resistance. But when we're thinking about planting, it's not necessarily just the individual tree selection, but why do we put trees together? One of the best strategies that we can have is planting in clusters or trying to help maintain existing canopies, because that existing canopy gives us the opportunity to essentially lift winds. So when we plant trees in large clusters, it can help lift the winds up and move them up and over in the properties, like you can kind of see in this image. It can slow down a lot of that wind significantly, and it does a lot of help in helping protect our properties. It's important to think about planting a variety of trees, because sometimes we may get some type of storm that comes in that causes some shear impact on trees. So you'll have some plant tree breakage, but having a variety can help with that recovery and that resilience. So we refer to these a lot of times as living windbreaks. So these windbreaks are just that natural habitat that we kind of plan, like we design or we maintain natural areas to help provide those windbreaks to help protect those properties. So trees closer to homes must have higher wind resistance, of course, because you don't want to have something that has a low wind resistance next to a house, because even if we have a lot of wind come through, if there is breakage that can occur, you still want to make sure that you are protecting your property. So if you are selecting any trees for your landscape, really make sure that you're trying to avoid any low wind resistant trees that are going to be around your home. So that's some of the design conditions and characteristics. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about maintenance. So maintenance really thinks about is like, okay, how do I maintain my landscape? How do I maintain my property and the trees? Not necessarily the shrubs. I mean, maintaining our shrubs and our landscapes is important, but when we're looking at where are we seeing the most damage done or concerns, it has to do with our trees and our landscape. And maintenance is going to be a very important part of that management. So we can actually prune for wind resistance by helping allow trees, pruning trees properly can help improve the wind resistance that they have. Improper pruning, something like that over pruning, we refer to as like lion tailing, that significantly reduces the wind resistance of those trees. So even if you have a very high wind resistant tree like a live oak, if it's pruned wrong, you can actually significantly decrease its wind resistance. Same thing goes for things like our cabbage palms or any of our palm trees. If the hurricane pruning can be problematic for our trees as well. So usually for palm trees, don't prune them. You don't have to prune them at all. It's just more of an aesthetic thing. But the concern that we do have is when we are pruning palm trees that they are over pruned. And historically, we've called it hurricane pruning, which we know is a very bad thing. Like you can see on the far right, that significantly reduces the overall quality and health and wind resistance of a palm tree. So, if you're looking for budget saving purposes, just don't prune your palm tree. And if you do prune it, just only cut out the things that are completely dead. But nonetheless, maintaining trees is very dangerous. So certain smaller trees, it's easy for us as homeowners to be able to maintain and manage, but we want to make sure that due to risk, we want to hire professionals for any type of major tree work because it is incredibly dangerous to do tree maintenance on larger trees. So that's why it's really important for us as homeowners and residents that we hire an ISA certified arborist to come to our property to help with that management as part of helping improve the wind resistance of our trees. So it's important to make sure that we are selecting that ISA certified arborist or certified arborist, because there are people that can come out to your property to do tree work that aren't actually certified arborists and may cause more damage to the trees on your landscape, reducing their wind resistance, which then increases the risk to our properties. So the best way or the best resource that we have is the online webpage, which is on here. It's treesaregood.org/find an arborist. So I'll actually open this up really quick, and I'm gonna have to share, switch my share screen. So one moment so you all can see this. So this is the website, treesaregood.org/find an arborist. So this is the landing page for ISA, the International Society of Arboriculture. And on here, they have an international database of all of their certified arborists. So you can go onto this online directory, treesaregood.org/find an arborist, and you can click on just find an arborist. You come down here, you can actually search very specific individuals, or you can search by location. So of course, since it's an international, you have to go to United States. You can go to Florida. You can do in any city that you'd like, or you can just do a zip code. So I'll do zip code and I'll say within 25 miles. So search. And it'll bring up all of the certified arborist, shows their company, their contact, and which type of certifications they have. So some individuals will have this ISA certified arborist. Well, they will all have that. They have to have that. But then others will have an advanced qualification called the ISA Tree Risk Assessment qualification. So this is just a great resource to come on here and see which companies are certified arborist, who that contact is with that company is that certified arborist, as well as what other additional certifications they have. So this is a wonderful online resource that we should be all going to whenever we're going to be hiring somebody to help maintain and manage our properties. So let me go back into here real quick. So that's a great resource, because what we can do as part of our maintenance, there's little things that we have the ability to do from a homeowner's perspective, but we also want to make sure that because of the risk, we want to make sure that we're hiring certified arborists. We want to make sure that they are licensed and insured. just because of the liability that's associated with it, and it's dangerous. You want to make sure that you're hiring somebody trustworthy, because you want to hire an arborist. When you reach out to them, you don't want to have necessarily the discussion of, I want to have a tree removed, but I have some canopies or trees on my property that I would like to help make sure that we are maintaining in a proper way to help improve their wind resistance. And don't do this when we see a storm coming, because good luck. You will not get an arborist to be able to come out to your property during that time. This is a conversation that we need to just build into the regular maintenance of our properties, considering, the frequency that we do have of storms. So proper tree maintenance, regular tree maintenance, is going to be very important. So have that conversation with a certified arborist to kind of figure out what needs to be done on those larger mature trees on your property, to help make sure that they're being maintained and pruned properly to help increase that storm mitigation. Or that help maintain that high wind resistance of trees. But there are some things that we can do as well. Really thinking about what are some of those parts of trees that could be of a high risk for breakage that we could potentially easily remove ourselves. So whenever we're pruning for wind resistance or preparing for a storm, some things that we can always do whenever we're pruning our trees on an annual basis or semi-annual basis is to cut out any dead, diseased, and damaged wood of a tree, or a shrub, of course, because any of those things that begin to rot, etc., that's going to be what we see as a highest susceptibility of breakage and causing potential damage to property or surrounding things in the landscape. So look for those dead, diseased, and damaged wood. Take out any types of water sprouts. So those water sprouts are essentially anything that's growing up, straight up on the branching. And then cut out any branches that are crossing, remove at least one of them. So if they're crossing and rubbing one another, make sure that one of those is removed, because that creates essentially an open wound on those branches, and that will increase the susceptibility of disease, past death, damage, etc. on that branch, and then leading to potential failure and breakage. And as well as clean off small branches or cluttering trees, so things that might be popping up below the tree that could potentially be causing some impacts. So there's little things that we can do to help maintain our trees and our property to help improve that wind resistance. But it's really, really important to know is this needs to be part of your regular annual maintenance for your landscape. It's not supposed to be something that you do once we have Jim Cantor show up on our property because a storm's about to hit us. It's going to be something that we just need to make sure that we're doing every couple years as part of our maintenance for mature trees, just to make sure that they're strong and resilient and successful within the landscape. So we have a storm, it's coming, it's showing up, we see it on the radar. There are some things that we can do as a result of immediate preparation for any storms that are coming in. So we can go out and try to remove any dead, broken branches if possible, safely. But it's important that if we don't have the ability to dispose of any of that, try to make sure it gets stored on an interior place like a garage or a shed, something like that, so it doesn't fly away during a storm that hits us. Make sure you remove or secure any debris, like I mentioned. Move any exterior furniture, hanging baskets, or containers inside of the house or inside a building, some way just to kind of help keep them from getting blown away, which can then lead to property damage. Secure any loose items. And then as well, if you have gutters, go ahead and clean gutters on your property, as well as walk around your neighborhood, clean up any of the storm drains. I know it might sound a little strange, but if we have a lot of clutter in those storm drains, it's going to be very hard for that storm water to go into the stormwater piping, storm drainage system. So clearing out storm drains will be significant in helping reduce any types of threats of potential flooding around your neighborhood. So I usually, right before a storm comes in, I'll do that. I'll just walk down the street and I'll just clean up some of the leaf litter that I see collecting on some of those storm drains. just to make sure that any water that comes in has the ability, or excess water that comes in has the ability to leave. But anyway, so that's some of the immediate preparation that you can do within those first few days prior to a storm coming in. But then after a storm, we really think about recovery. Recovery is, critical. This is something that can happen the day after a storm, a couple days after the storm. But one of the most important things that we always need to consider is safety first. Whenever we're looking or during any type of post-storm recovery, there could be down power lines, there could be issues with stormwater, there could be flooding. There's a lot of things that we really need to consider that can still create threats within our communities after storm leaves. So safety first. Still, it might take some time, but if you have some trees that are having some significant damage, like as a result of a storm, all of a sudden your tree is leaning, call an arborist. It's going to take a little bit to get them out, but it's going to be important because a leaning tree right after a storm is a concern of the results of like root breakage and destabilization of that tree. Always make sure those arborists are insured, and always ask if they are aware of the ANSI guidelines, because those are the standards that arborists must follow. And then also have a good understanding of expected cost, timeframe, procedures that are required or involved as part of that process. But again, safety first in that post-storm recovery. But, going back to, if we think about designing, if we think about that maintenance, it helps make that recovery process a little bit easier for us in our properties. So some of the big lessons learned that we have include higher speeds. No matter what we do, there's always going to be more likely trees fail, but groups of trees survive better than the individual ones, and having groups of trees as windbreaks helps protect properties significantly more better than not having them at all. Some trees are more resistant than others, so make sure that we're aware of that as part of our tree selection. Make that part of our criteria for right plant, right place when we're selecting trees for our properties. Palms do survive typically better, and that's a great thing. Pines can decline over time, but they do typically have a higher wind resistance at first. So it's also important to know that leaf loss does not mean decline right after a storm. So a storm can completely defoliate a tree. It can, and it will, and that tree can be 100% fine. So don't let that be an indicator, because healthy trees are resilient and recover very quickly. Native trees typically survive better. Older trees can be likely to fail just because there might be some areas where we might have some internal rot that's occurring. So the internal structure of the trees could end up causing failures to occur, like what we see in some of our laurel and water oaks. Unhealthy trees are predisposed to damage. So that's why we want to make sure that we're maintaining and protecting our trees to help reduce that risk. Poorly structured trees or poorly maintained, poorly pruned trees are more vulnerable to damage. And then well-pruned trees survive better. A well-pruned tree that has low wind resistance will do better probably in a landscape than a tree that's high wind resistance but is poorly pruned and maintained. So going back, our ultimate goal is just how do we reduce threat of wind-related damage? So thinking about design, thinking about that landscape resilience, using these ecosystem services, following right plant, right place, is how can we create a landscape and an environment where the landscape is working with us rather than against us. Use trees as a way to help protect our properties. And it really starts with that design. And then after design, we really think about how do we maintain and prepare our properties to make sure they're maintained properly so we can have a landscape that's more resilient to any type of wind-related damage associated with storms. And then lastly, recovery is going to be one of those big things that we need to consider, because recovery can help set the stage as well for that resilience of our landscape. So now at the end of the program, today's a little bit short program, but you should be able to think, how do I prepare a hurricane-ready, resilient landscape? And always remember, with those trees, think about design, maintenance, and recovery. And it's not something that we do the day before a storm comes, but we need to be thinking about landscape maintenance and tree maintenance as part of our regular maintenance of our landscape, because that is what is going to be required to help make sure that our trees and our landscape, or trees within our landscape, are going to be as resilient as possible and help weather the storm. So we now have some time for some questions. Feel free to put any questions in the chat box, or anybody that is at the extension office, you can have someone relay any of your questions to me over the microphone. I hear someone, but I can't hear you, if that makes sense.
Taylor, we're all set. We don't have any questions.
Okay, cool.